from your experience in the industry, those wells have probably been drilled at slightly different places, but still into the same seams. So what's the possibility that the wells that Santos have drilled, which we can't get the data for, have actually got lower CO2? Or are they likely to be the same CO2 as were reported in the 214?
It's a very good question. There are actually only 2 wells drilled after 2015. So the 250, it's where the 250 samples come from, I don't know. There are channels and tracks. If you go to page 7 of the presentation, you'll see how the CO2 is mapped. There are areas within the project area that do have low CO2. If you look down the southwest corner, there's a few wells that are quite low. Whether Santos is only producing those because they're making gas for the Narrabri power station, and if they're producing the low CO2 wells and sampling them, then of course they'll get low CO2 samples. But when you drill appraisal wells, you drill them over the whole area. And if you look at page 7 of the presentation, those are wells over the whole project area. If you're selectively producing, if I look at that, I can see some low CO2 areas, maybe 20, 30% of the area. That has to have major implications for the size of the resource that is actually low CO2. But without knowing about these samples, the provenance, the location, the timing, and what these samples are of Santos, I'm forced to discount them because there's just actually no detail behind them. I can only look at wide aerial coverage as on slide 7. I can only look at what the data says, and I go as an experienced engineer. That's over the whole project area. Yes, there are some good areas. In the main, it's looking pretty unfortunate. If Mount Capitar is a mountain near Narrabri, I grew up in the shadow of Mount Capitar, funnily enough. It's an igneous volcanic plug. And any geologist will tell you that if you have igneous rocks under shallow coals, then they probably have very high CO2. And the reason is that igneous rocks emit CO2 and coal absorbs it. The geology is actually quite simple.
Andrew,
so the easiest way around this would be for Santos to make public data after 2015 and these 250 samples.
That you've anticipated my question, Andrew. What justification is given for the CO2 content after 2014 or 15, wherever it is, being confidential?
There's no justification. The way that exploration data works under most regimes is that data before a certain time becomes publicly available. That usually applies to well data. Production data is usually always confidential. Whether that's in the public interest or not is another issue, I believe, but it should be available. And I think that it's convenient in this case to hide behind the veil of commerciality, enduring confidentiality on the production data, which I contacted the Geological Survey, and they're not allowed to make it available without Santos' permission, which was not forthcoming. One wonders why. The well data, as I said, there were only 2 wells drilled after 2015. I can't see how 2 wells stacked up against 40 could actually make a difference in the analysis. So there's a lot of missing information, which if it was brought out transparently and assessed by someone who knew what they were doing, we could have some knowledge. Right now, we only have the knowledge from the 40 wells, and that says it's 30% CO2.
Andrew, we have a question from John as well.
Yes, Andrew, we've heard from a number of presenters over the last couple of days in regard to differing views on the cost of production, and that the Narrabri gas project is either a low-cost or a high-cost facility. With your industry experience, where would it sit on the cost curve?
Well, there's 2 answers to that question. The cost of gas is one thing, the price of gas is another.
Understood.
And that's actually, if you go to slide 4, you will see that I have plotted where Narrabri sits in terms of the marginal cost curve. And I have plotted, it's the on slide 4.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, top right hand. It has the clearing price of LNG, which is the red dot where the NGP gas would sit.
Right.
And it has the contract price that we're currently seeing right now at that oil price, which is the $9. You can see that at the AEMO costs of $7.40, which I believe is probably reasonable. And the reason is it's a greenfield development with no existing infrastructure. It needs another pipeline, and the resource quality is not that high. Those numbers are pretty reasonable. And they could be assessed by someone else. But I doubt very much there's cheap gas. I've looked at the numbers. $8 seems reasonable, if nothing else. You can see that $8 is under the value to Santos of $9, and that's due to some effects in terms of non-performance under LNG contracts. But it doesn't change the fact that if any producer, whatever the cost of the gas, and Santos is producing some gas from the Cooper Basin at $1 a gigajoule, it's kind of irrelevant. But the fact is they sell that gas at $9 a gigajoule. So what's most important is how the price is set and not the cost of the gas. If the cost of the project is $10 a gigajoule and Santos wants to proceed with it, that's really a matter for Santos' shareholders. We shouldn't be concerned with that. What we're concerned with, well, it means that the profits and the royalties and the taxes will be considerably reduced, of course. But what appears to be the prime focus is the price of gas, and that remains at sort of $9 when the clearing price is $7, and it will be at $9 unless the volume is higher. The principal issue here is volume. It's not the cost to produce, but as in any marginal cost curve, you'll see on the one in green, as you start to produce the least desirable reserves, they have the highest costs, and eventually you get to a point where you just cannot satisfy the market at the price that the market will pay.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
That concludes our questions. Thanks, Andrew. Move on to our next speaker.